Hello, everyone. So, the title of my research is China's Belt and Road in the Philippines in the post COVID 19 era. Under the Duterte administration, the Belt and Road Initiative became one of the focal points of cordial relations with China, despite ongoing territorial disputes in the South China Sea, as well as low public opinion of China. So, from the administration's pivot to China, particularly in relation to Duterte's Build program, concerns have been often raised concerning the debt trap risk of China funded infrastructure, as well as their putative linkages with worsened corruption, social, and environmental dynamics. Moreover, the COVID 19 pandemic, which resulted in many disruptions to the global economy, has further worsened the already significant delays in BRI infrastructure projects and has also deeply altered the cost benefit calculations of countries participating in the BRI. So, against this background, the aim of this research is twofold. First, to examine the development of the Duterte administration's present and prospective China funded projects, as well as the issues concerning them. And second, to analyze the prospects of BRI projects in the Philippines given the COVID 19 pandemic. Having said that, the following are my research questions. In what ways does the COVID 19 pandemic affect the overall infrastructure development in the Philippines, especially that of China funded transport mega projects? And what are the prospects of the BRI projects in the Philippines? How can we expect these projects to adapt in the pandemic and post pandemic era? So, just a briefer, in 2013, Chinese President Xi Jinping unveiled the Belt and Road Initiative, or the BRI, bannering it as China's key initiative designed to engage neighboring states and regions in international cooperation through overland and maritime connections. Inspired by the ancient Silk Road trade routes, the BRI aims to enhance connectivity across Africa, Asia, and Europe through numerous infrastructure projects that would promote not only physical connectivity between regions, but also smoother trade flows and people to people linkages. If successful, the BRI can alter the global economy as it can radically transform market opportunities, transportation, competition, productivity, and logistics. So, since its launch in 2013, the Belt and Road Initiative has stirred intense international debate over its political economic impacts and a wide range of associated risks, inciting both positive and negative perceptions. On one hand, the BRI is perceived as a promising initiative given its ambitious effort to improve connectivity on a transcontinental scale. On the other hand, there are also fears over debt trap risks associated with it. So as of March 2020, 138 countries have joined and inked the Memorandum of Understanding with the BRI. So one of the most significant trends of recent years has been a growing role of ASEAN in the BRI. In general, to meet their economic growth and development objectives, ASEAN member states will have to attract more infrastructure investment. According to the Asian Development Bank, 3 trillion US dollars of climate adjusted investments will be needed from 2016 to, to 2030 to maintain the current development momentum in Southeast Asia. However, according to the Brookings Institute, traditional Western investments in Southeast Asia are either not keeping up with the region's needs or are turning away from infrastructure. This gap therefore leaves room for more BRI investment in the region. So even as COVID-19 continues to batter global trade and investment, China's economic ties with ASEAN member states have remained solid. In fact, ASEAN has replaced the European Union as China's top trading partner in 2020. Moreover, as shown in the chart, BRI investments in Southeast Asia grew from 16.8 billion US dollars in 2014 to 29.3 billion US dollars in 2019, accounting for 27.6% of all BRI investments worldwide. And in these 6 years, construction contracts made up 46.2% of BRI investments in Southeast Asia. Therefore, the investment data, as well as the changes in trade partners, indicate that China has been leaning increasingly on the ASEAN market, and the region has become more important to BRI investment amid the pandemic disruption and increased geopolitical tensions. So, compared with its neighbors in Southeast Asia, the Philippines is a latecomer in cooperating with China's Belt and Road Initiative. When the BRI was first announced in 2013, Manila and Beijing were engaged in a very serious expat over the South China Sea, particularly after the administration of former late President Benigno Aquino III had filed a case with the Permanent Court of Arbitration that same year, contesting China's growing encroachments into the Philippines' exclusive economic zone and its claimed territories. In July 2016, the Philippine government won its case. However, during this time, Duterte had already assumed the presidency. So rather than pursuing the arbitral award to protect the Philippines' maritime rights, Duterte changed the country's China policy drastically from one prioritizing the assertion of the Philippines' legal rights to one preferring pragmatic cooperation with China. Significantly, there was a convergence between China's grandiose plans for infrastructure and economic connectivity under the BRI and the Duterte administration's preference for closer ties with China, or the so-called pivot to China. While the Philippines is not directly on any of the BRI's routes, Chinese support was important for Duterte's ambitious infrastructure build-up program called Build, or BBB, which was unveiled to the public in April 2017. Dubbed as the boldest infrastructure development program in recent Philippine history, the infrastructure drive has aimed to invest between 160 to 180 billion US dollars across nearly 5,000 projects until the end of Duterte's term in 2022, including 104 large-scale flagship ventures. Of the public infrastructure projects prioritized by the Philippine government, several, including the construction of expressways, bridges, railroads, and flood control, had already been earmarked for Chinese funding. However, it was only in November 2018, during President Xi Jinping's state visit to Manila, that the Philippines and China formally signed the Memorandum of Understanding on Cooperation on the Belt and Road Initiative. So, as mentioned, the Duterte administration has sought to inculcate an aggressive acceleration in infrastructure spending. In doing so, it has departed from the Aquino administration's Public-Private Partnership Program, or the PPP, in favor of arguably the most state-heavy approach to infrastructural development since the end of the Marcos period. There has been a significant shift of funding proportion from PPPs under the Aquino administration towards Official Development Assistance, or ODA, under Duterte. While the prevailing perception has been that the Build has privileged Chinese ODA above that of traditional bilateral partners, in practice, however, as you can see in the figure, the picture has been more mixed, and many of the most expensive foreign-funded projects, as well as the largest share of ODA in general, have remained assigned to Japan, followed by the Asian Development Bank and the World Bank. Although China had long been one of the Philippines' major trading partners, it was not an important investor or source of official development assistance. However, with new programs such as the BRI and the China-led Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, or the AIIB, China was beginning to be viewed in the Philippines, as well as in other parts of the world, as the largest potential source of infrastructure financing. So as shown in the table, in 2019 and 2020, there were at least 17 proposed ventures in the Build flagship infrastructure pipeline that had either secured or were officially being eyed for Chinese financing, spanning nearly 600 billion pesos in projected costs. Yet, as of now, only four of these infrastructure projects have commenced construction, including the Binondo Intramuros and Estrella Pantaleon bridges, as well as the Kaliwa Dam and the Chico River pump projects, which combined only amounted to around 22 billion pesos. So, despite the slow approval and development of China funded projects by the administration, both ongoing and still to be implemented projects have elicited a disproportionate amount of controversy. The Kaliwa Dam and the Chico River pump projects, for instance, have been opposed not only by environmentalists and affected communities, but also by legal experts and economic observers due to the government's bypassing of cheaper, less environmental destructive alternative water supply projects. Both the Binondo Intramuros and Estrella Pantaleon bridges have also experienced delays on account of local resistance. The Binondo Intramuros bridge, due to the opposition by business groups, UNESCO, and the National Historical Commission to its proposed destruction of protected heritage sites in Intramuros, and the Australia Pantaleon traversal because of the disruptive impacts of the original bridge's demolition and reconstruction on traffic congestion and on local economic activity. In the same vein, among approved but still to be implemented projects, the Subic-Clark Railway and the Mindanao Railway Phase 1 have also been identified by observers as possible white elephant projects in the making, or those large-scale projects that are economically burdensome for governments that are responsible for maintaining them. So aside from the aforementioned controversies that surround the China-assisted projects, there are also governance issues that could aggravate the possibility of unviable projects being approved and selected. First is that if the managerial and technical capabilities of agencies are not augmented prior to the infrastructure ramp up, there will be a substantial risk of bureaucratic overstretch, increasing the likelihood of selecting of unviable projects later in the project cycle. While the Duterte administration has adopted several landmark transparency and open government measures, such as the creation of a landmark executive order on freedom on information, or the FOI, there has been evidence that the effectiveness of such mechanisms have been quite limited with respect to securing detailed information and vital documents of foreign funded infrastructure projects. Moreover, compared to the administration's rhetoric of curbing the scourge of underspending that afflicted infrastructure development during the Aquino presidency, high levels of underutilization of infrastructure budgets have persisted well into the present administration. Another issue is on the concerns over the integrity of procurement processes associated with China-linked undertakings. While often celebrated as a landmark piece of legislation, the 2003 Government Procurement Reform Act, or RA 9184, exempted foreign assisted government projects from standard procurement protocols for Philippine government activities by elevating clauses in international agreement above the said law. So, in the absence of more standardized guidelines for how contractors for foreign assisted projects are to be chosen, this effectively ties procurement processes to conditions provided by foreign countries, a problem which has been less pronounced with the practices adopted by the Philippines' traditional donors, given their alignment with the development finance and ODA standards once adopted by the OECD. Moreover, studies have also shown that due to sustained advocacy and reforms, OECD-aligned donors are much more likely to provide efficient, effective, legitimate, transparent, and adaptive policies related to project implementation. By comparison, Chinese ODA has not been aligned to such multilateral standards and is well known to not impose the same kinds of political and good governance conditionalities as is common practice among OECD Development Assistance Committee donors. Indeed, while these precedents continue to hound the development dynamics of the Duterte administration's infrastructure projects, the ongoing pandemic has certainly aggravated the current situation and is expected to alter the overall infrastructure development agenda. So, in what ways does the COVID-19 pandemic affect the overall infrastructure development in the Philippines, especially that of China-funded projects? First, the resource requirements of the response to the pandemic are expected to reduce the fiscal space initially allotted for the portfolio of investments and could therefore slow down or delay the movement and implementation of projects. And second, should the pandemic prove to be protracted in nature, the viability of rail, airport, and tourism mega projects will be undermined. Like for instance, just as with the sectoral upheavals experienced by air travel, hospitality, and tourism industries since the inception of the COVID-19 pandemic, a failure to stamp out the disease will mean that air travel, including for tourism purposes, will be dampened for the foreseeable future, which will undermine the returns of projects aimed at supporting the operations of these sectors. Similarly, when it comes to mass commuter railways, which comprise several of the most expensive projects in the build portfolio, should COVID-19 social distancing measures be required for the foreseeable future, immense subsidies may be required to keep such railways and their operators commercially afloat. So while the yield from the government's rapprochement with China has yet to place the share of China-assisted or China-funded projects on par with the Philippines' traditional donors, the possibility of generating unviable infrastructure projects remains significant. As discussed, the implementation of China-funded projects has been compounded with exemptions in Philippine procurement protocols, as well as weak governance conditionalities in Chinese ODA that can result in bloated financial, economic, and social costs, as well as inflated risks in the course of project development. And far from thrusting these issues concerning build, and its China-funded projects to the side, the COVID-19 pandemic has indeed accentuated them. So how then can we expect the China-funded BBB projects to adapt in the pandemic and post-pandemic era? Are more project cancellations on the horizon, or will infrastructure construction be seen as critical to economic recovery, employment, and long-term growth? Institutionally, little seems to be stopping the continuation of the said projects. Despite persistent criticisms by different sectors and institutions of certain key projects, the government has insisted on pushing through with them and insists that such projects are precisely critical to its economic recovery programs. With regard to the prospects of the Philippines' engagement with the BRI, the pandemic indeed compels a rethink of the Duterte presidency's infrastructure program in general and its espousal of China-funded projects in particular, at least in three ways. First, in light of the urgent spending needs required by the pandemic, the infrastructure program will have to be modified to expand budgetary space for the government's health and social amelioration efforts, which will be essential spending areas to bolster the country's response to the COVID outbreak. Second, though the implementation of the build projects can provide a major boost to an economy in freefall, the enforcement of social distancing protocols in construction efforts will slow down these projects' development and for most of them further diminish their likelihood of being completed within the current administration. Third, as already mentioned, if COVID-19 persists, the adoption of travel restrictions and social distancing means or would severely impair the long-term viability of particular types of build project, especially that of China-funded transport mega projects. Therefore, Amid the COVID-19 pandemic, the turn of the Philippine government to increased debt-driven growth as part of its economic recovery program makes careful selection of infrastructure projects, both China and non-China funded, even more crucial. In other words, the advent of the pandemic has indeed further underscored the need for shifting away from unviable mega projects towards more um, cost-effective and resilient infrastructure for the foreseeable future, which may require deferring some of the largest prospective China-funded projects. So that ends my presentation. Thank you.